Grace and peace to you in the name of God, the Creator, Christ the Redeemer, and the Spirit who sustains us. Amen. I'm not asking for a show of hands or anything, but how many of you are aware of Juneteenth? How many of you were aware of it 5 or 10 years ago? I was not. You may know what it commemorates, but how much do you actually know about the holiday, about its history and its significance? This coming Friday is Juneteenth, the day when we celebrate the final enforcement of Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation on June 19th, 1865, 900 days after Lincoln issued the proclamation freeing slaves in the American South. It was first celebrated on June 19, 1866 in Galveston, Texas as Jubilee Day. Early Juneteenth celebrations were often held at churches since many public places were off limits for Black people to gather. Today, traditions tend to be local, but some common threads exist. There are often voter registration efforts, and the celebrations are seen as ways to instill pride in Black community and heritage, teaching people about history and culture. People gather to eat and drink together, often red dishes such as watermelon, red beans and rice, and hibiscus tea, to tell their stories and the stories of their ancestors in this land, to hear those stories being told and see them reenacted, and sometimes even to celebrate their culture and their heritage through music and dance. I learned while researching this sermon that the color red is an important part of many Juneteenth celebrations. According to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, the association of the color red with Juneteenth festivals traces back to West Africa, the ancestral home of many people who were brought across the Atlantic on the Middle Passage in the slave trade. In West Africa, the color has been used to symbolize strength, spirituality, life, and death. Like anything else in the world, this celebration of Juneteenth has been cyclical. In the first 100 years or so after the Civil War, Juneteenth was primarily a Texas holiday, spreading out from there as Black people from that state moved to other parts of the country. There have been times when Juneteenth has not been widely celebrated, whether because of economic hardship or because people seem to lose the original spirit of the holiday. However, there have also been times when Juneteenth has been strongly linked to the push for reparations and the push toward equality. With recent moves to undo efforts toward creating a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive society, it feels as though Juneteenth deserves to be celebrated, along with any holiday or festival that celebrates a culture that encourages us to see the world in a broader, more colorful way. It deserves to be appreciated and understood as the gift that it is, an opportunity to listen to each other, to learn to appreciate and understand each other in deeper and truer ways, an opportunity to learn how to better love our neighbors. After all, that's our call as Christians, to be open to seeing God's love, God's story everywhere we look, to spend our lives in worship to God no matter what else we are doing. At the Synod Assembly, Kristen Cook, our director of evangelical mission, said she has 2 goals for us as a synod: for everyone to feel equipped to listen to God, to our congregation, and to our neighbors, and for all members to practice telling someone else the story of God's witness in their lives. The second goal may provide food for thought for a future sermon, but for this morning, I want to focus on her first goal, on the listening. Listening to God and to our neighbors happens in all kinds of places, in all kinds of ways. Sometimes the deepest listening happens when our eyes and our ears give us conflicting information, creating a paradox that we have to think our way through until we understand, or that we might be able to grasp for only the briefest of instants before losing our insight, trusting in our faith in God to see us through until we too stand before the Holy of Holies, and all is made clear to us. John faces one such paradox in our reading from Revelation today when he sees in God's right hand the scroll that contains the things that God has willed for God's people which have not yet been fulfilled. But no one can be found in heaven or on the earth or under the earth who is worthy to break open the seals and read the scroll. Not a single person, not even the emperor himself, is worthy to read and share what God has in store for the faithful. But then one of the elders who spends all their days worshiping God tells John not to despair. The Lion is coming, the Root of David, the one who has triumphed and who is worthy to open the scrolls. When we hear the word lion, we all conjure a certain image in our heads, don't we? It might be Mufasa from The Lion King, or an animal we've seen at the zoo or on a Sir David Attenborough documentary. Or since we're reading Revelation, we might think of Aslan, the son of the emperor over the sea in the Narnia series. But then when the lion, the Root of David, the one who has triumphed, appears, John's eyes reveal something very different. A lamb that had been slain approaches God to take the scroll and break the seals. Now, don't get caught up trying to imagine a lamb with 7 horns and 7 eyes. Remember, John doesn't mean what he says. He means what he means. If you recall, 7 was the number of perfection or completion in the ancient world. We can remember this by remembering that, at least figuratively speaking, it took God 7 days to create the world. The Sabbath is on the 7th day of the week. The Jubilee is every 7th year. Those things are all related and all intentional. That's the significance of the number of horns and eyes. Horns were an ancient symbol of royal power. So for the lamb to have 7 horns means that the lamb has complete power, perfect power. And the 7 eyes are a way of telling us that the lamb can see all things in heaven, on earth, and under the earth. We have to hold this lion and this lamb in paradox in order to truly understand the vision of Jesus, the vision of God that John is giving us, to understand why it is that this lamb is worthy, why Jesus is worthy when he came to earth as a human, lived and died as a human, and then lived again to break the seal on the scroll when no one else is worthy. There's a reason we call the lion the king of beasts. They're large, powerful, majestic-looking animals with a loud roar that can be heard up to 5 miles away. They're apex predators. They have no naturally occurring predators of their own. And so humans have long associated kings with lions. Kings rule by being more powerful than anyone else in the room. Some kings even rule by force, grabbing what they want to take and destroying anyone they see as their enemy. But God, in Jesus, through the Spirit, chooses to rule another way. As a lamb, a symbol of sacrifice, of purposeful death. The promise of the lion, the king who is coming to fulfill the promises made to David, both the root and the ultimate branch of David's family tree, is fulfilled in the Lamb who was slain. God's power is unleashed into the world through the death and resurrection of Jesus. His self-sacrificial act, his refusal to climb down from the cross and save himself from the empire who killed him because they saw him as an enemy, is the act that builds God's kingdom by redeeming all people. It makes no sense to the ones who seek power and wealth for the sake of power and wealth. It makes no sense in Rome. It makes no sense to those who are threatened by the idea of Juneteenth as a holiday, who are threatened by a celebration of any culture that is not their own, who prefer dominance to empathy, judgment to mercy, greed to love. John is making a claim about Jesus' power and authority as compared to the power and authority of the Roman emperor. We might say, to pull this into the 21st century, John is making a claim about Jesus' power and authority as compared to the power and authority of the Christian nationalists, or about Jesus' power and authority as compared to the power and authority of anyone who is threatened by a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive society. Because make no mistake about it, that's exactly the society John is envisioning in his bold and revelatory look at God's will for creation. Listen again to the new hymn the elders and the four living creatures sang in verses 9 and 10. Worthy are you to receive the scroll and break the seven seals, for you were slain. With your blood you purchased for God members of every race and tongue, of every people and nation. You made of them a kingdom, priests to serve our God, and they will reign on the earth. Members of every race and tongue, of every people and nation. And all of them are made priests to serve God. And then an infinite chorus made up of all of the creatures, not just the humans, in heaven, on the earth, under the earth, and in the sea, start singing together. Not just the birds and the butterflies and the dogs and the blue whales, but even the deep sea anglerfish and the earthworms and the cicadas, all singing praise and honor, glory and dominion forever and ever to God. How do we hold ourselves open to hear that story? Amen.